Dr. Kevin is in with the Bryant Wellness Institutes of Acadiana, and it's always a delight to have you in here. What you got for us today?
Well, we finally get to continue our discussion on water purification today, and why that's important. You know, I guess it's been 2 or 3 weeks ago now we talked about fluoride in the water, and whether that was a good idea or not. And, you know, many wellness practitioners are starting to sound the alarm that may no longer be the best idea. And I'm among those professionals, and not just me, but that also agrees with lots of Harvard researchers and doctors and wellness advisors and others that think that it's probably not the best way to, quote, protect us from cavities. We have so many other ways to get fluoride on our teeth. We have fluoride toothpastes and rinses and treatments from the dentist. We don't necessarily need to dump that in our water supply so that we drink and it gets on the inside of our body into every cell, because fluoride is one of the most toxic substances on the planet. It's right up there with mercury. And so you wouldn't want them dumping mercury in your water.
Sure.
And so we don't necessarily think fluoride is the best thing. And it's been banned in many other countries in Europe and around the world. Countries are starting to realize that this may be responsible for some of the health problems that we're experiencing in society that have just now come about. You know, if you look at some of the disease rates of some of these hormonal disorders and female disorders and things like that rate is increasing rapidly, and some of that could be of the chemicals and the things that we're putting in our water. Now, one of the other ones is arsenic. You know, arsenic is in almost all drinking water, and the government has standard maximums. But these levels are set rather liberal, and some cities even exceed this from time to time in the level of arsenic in the water. And then, of course, the third big one is chlorine. Chlorine is added to water supplies as a cheap way of kill bacteria, but in the body, it can form something called trihalomethanes, which is a really strong carcinogen. And now, if there's a scare like a few years ago, remember the brain-eating amoeba that we had in our water a few years ago?
Yeah.
They increased the chlorine levels dramatically in order to kill that. Now, I'm not saying that's not a good idea. That's a very good idea. None of us want a brain-eating amoeba floating around our water supply. But the key to that is you have to remove all of these things as it comes into your home or as you drink it. So just turning on the tap anymore, you get a whole soup of different things that really need to be filtered out at this point in today's world before we consume this water. Now, the big one that nobody realizes that's in our water is drug residues. You know, our bodies do not absorb all the medication that we take in. Much of it gets flushed into the city's wastewater. And the wastewater treatment centers are not designed to filter drug residues at all. And so it ends up back out in the reservoirs, back in our tap water. And in fact, they tested for 95 pharmaceutical residues and found them in 85% of the drinking water.
It's unreal.
Some of the most common drugs, you know, the Lipitors, the antibiotics, the female hormones, those top, you know, the main drugs out there gets flushed back, and some of the residues. They found 10 or more residues in more than a third of the drinking water. And so the bottom line with all of this is that we can do a much better job filtering out our water, and it's up to you. It's not up to the city in order to do this. You have to do this at your home. You can't rely on the tap water to be the healthiest option any longer. And unfortunately, bottled water is not any better. In fact, it may be worse because the chemicals from the plastic bottle leach into there. So, you know, bottled water is basically just tap water that they've run through a filter. And so we have to take and filter our own water before we drink it and before we put it in things.
Is there a way you can test your water at your house?
Yeah, there is. There's several places that you can go online for water testing, and you can take a little sample of it and send it off, and they can test it for you for sure. And that's always a great thing to do. Even though that fluctuates from day to day, what's actually in the water, it can give you a really good idea, especially if you have a well. something I would absolutely recommend doing every year or two. And depending on what city you live in, what town you live in, definitely a great idea too. And that's another way you can attest the effectiveness of your filter. You can test it before and then put your filter on your house or whatever filter you're going to use, and then test it after as well. So what I want to do when we get back from break is I'm going to talk about the different filters that you can get and what to look for when shopping for a filter, and some of the costs involved, and what goes into all of that, because we've got to do this ourselves. You can't just you can't just sort of rely on the city waste treatment plant or the water treatment plant in order to take care of these things for you. You really have to do this at home.
We're messing up the planet, aren't we? Jeez.
And so after the break, we're going to talk about the filters that you can get, the costs involved, and all that. So we'll have all that for you right after the break.